Domestique Cooldown, the penultimate stage of the Tour de France for 2025. We expected a breakaway day, and that is what we got. 184 kilometers from Nantua to Pontarlier. Big fight for the breakaway in the beginning over the first few climbs, in which we saw a big group go away with initially not much cohesion, thanks to the GC man, Jordan Gigat, who was 11th place on GC at the start of the day, sneaking his way into the break. But once the other riders saw how happy he was to pull the breakaway along, they seemed to be okay with letting him hang around. We then saw this group work relatively well together until a very solid climb with around 70 Ks to go in the race, which was lit up by Jordan Gigat himself. I don't think so much to try and break away as to make the breakaway continue their pace and gain as much time on GC as he could. He was then bridged across to by Harry Sweeney, who looked for quite a long time like he was going to have a good chance at the stage win. He was then caught as the group behind splintered, and it looked like we were going to have a decent-sized group coming into the finish until a crash from Ivan Romeo and Roman Gregoire on one of the final descents of the day left three riders in front. This was Kaden Groves, Jake Stewart, and Frank Vandenbroek. Frank Vandenbroek and Jake Stewart seemed pretty content to argue behind at one point in the race, which gave Kaden Groves the gap that he needed to stay away and take his first Tour de France stage win and complete the holy trinity of stage wins at the 3 Grand Tours. And we are just, having watched a very emotional Kaden Groves interview. Aidan Burgess, did he shed a tear?
No, but I think I was the closest I have been. I think Kaden, I'm actually just drafting up a script for a reel while I was waiting for you to jump on. And the guy has just had such a, it must have been so emotional when Philipsen crashed out. It seems like a lifetime ago. Some people might have even forgotten that happened because it was so early. But he crashed out. I think it was stage 6 of the tour. And then the pivot goes to Van der Poel, even though Groves is looking really good. There was a stage where it looked like the preference was for Van der Poel, and he was the one hunting stage wins. Groves seemed to shift into that first lead out man. They had some issues in regards to getting that dialed in, and it looked like their tour was going to collapse. And then Van der Poel managed to get a stage win, and things might have been looking like they were going well. Groves probably a bit upset about not being able to ride for himself. But again, like you'd said earlier, he's just such a good bloke that he probably wasn't piping up in, even though he's got the form coming into this. And then, he'd be sitting here, Van der Poel pulls out because I think he has pneumonia. So then we've got diminishing opportunities for Kaden to go for this stage win. He's seeing his chances slip away. Today is not one at all that we had earmarked for a rider like Kaden Groves, and then somehow to pull it out, get his first stage win. I think I was seeing somewhere that he is the 6th youngest person to win a Tour de France stage win as well. So yeah, I mean, I am a little bit emotional about it. It helps.
Yeah, definitely. We had two great Aussie chances there in the final. Both Queenslanders who, as a Victorian and yourself a New South Welshman, we would just say that we're happier to see a Queenslander win than the opposite, which is either of our two states with the rivalry. I think Queenslanders are the popular third state in that equation, but
not
really
in New
crazy.
South Wales.
No, yeah, not especially after the rugby
not with
recently.
The state of origin.
Yeah, exactly. But great that. Well, also really interesting that you had Harry Sweeney and Kaden Groves, who are pretty good mates, both Queenslanders, spend a lot of time training together in Andorra in the past, would have been chatting throughout the Tour de France in the peloton, and they were the two protagonists in the end. And also just the fact that Kaden did a lot of work in chasing Harry down there, and Kaden wasn't the only one that would have been happy in that break to see Harry win, I think, because I especially when it started raining, gave Harry a really big chance. One, because he's looked so strong the whole tour and looked really strong today. But two, because he's got Kaden, good mate in the bunch behind, who also loves the rain. But And then Tim Wellens, really good mates with. They spent a lot of time together on Lotto, also a lot of time here in Nice and Monaco training together. Matteo Jorgensen, Harry was housemates with in Nice for a few years as well. So a lot of mates in that bunch that I thought, hang on, all of these guys wouldn't mind seeing Harry Sweeney take the stage win here. But obviously there's a bike race to be won, and Kaden seemed pretty keen to win it the whole day. And it reminded me really of the Peter Sagan scenario where he's the fastest guy there. No one was going to want to work with him the whole way to the line. So he just took matters into his own hands and went, well, instead of waiting for people to start attacking me and make me chase everything down, I'm just going to always be on the front foot. He was just, as soon as, even when Harry was off the front there, he was happy to go to the front on all the climbs and set the pace. And then Harry was caught, he was throwing in attacks himself. Obviously, the crash helped his chances in that created that separation. But then he was never looking at others to pull, and he was always happy to be going on the front himself. And it helps that he was actually probably the strongest rider in the group by looks of things as well.
It looked like woeful conditions. When the crash did happen, I actually thought it was Kaden Groves because Romeo's Spanish national champs jersey was so dirty that it actually looked grey. And I thought it was, just on a brief glance, it looked like a grey jersey with the Alpecin logo. And I thought that is not good. That's such a shame for Kaden. Obviously a shame for Ivan and Romeo. But if there was anyone that I wouldn't want to crash, it's Kaden Groves in that group. So yeah, really, really awesome to see another Aussie get up, and just, I think, another example of the Aussies punching way above their weight in the Tour de France. But I think it then means that we need to pivot to another Australian team that I think went a little bit MIA today. So Ben O'Connor now is outside of the top 10. And it doesn't look like that will be coming back. I know tomorrow is a harder stage, so it's not the procession that we're used to. But yeah, I think that's probably the top 10 done for O'Connor. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think so. Especially just the kind of rider he is on tomorrow's course. He isn't the type that you would imagine would be a good chance of taking that time back. Yeah, a bit sad to see that, because the team would have had a big emphasis on holding on to that top 10 on the stage. Ben O'Connor, I'd say, while he got he didn't get no team support. He had one very crucial teammate who we'll touch on in a sec, but he had very limited team support. I think the mood on the team bus would be pretty terrible, because a lot of guys that would have wanted to be there to be able to help just weren't. And these guys, I'm sure, aren't just saying, "Oh, well, it's stage 20. I've checked out by now." This is the Luke Durbridge and Luke Platt riders that I'm not expecting Dylan Groenewegen to get on the front on a stage like this and pull something back, but Durbo and Plappy likely would have liked to have been able to do more to help that situation. But at the same time, Benno will just be very annoyed at himself for not being able to follow Jagat at that point, because he was the closest on GC and he was the one guy they didn't want in the move, and he was the guy that got in the move. So tough day for them, but we touched on it when they won the stage. If they had the choice between a stage win and 10th on GC, a stage win and 11th on GC versus no stage win and 10th on GC, I think they'd take what has happened. But seemed like it should have been somewhat avoidable what happened for them today. And also, we've got to take our hats off and give a chapeau to Jordan Jagat for racing aggressively and just getting out there and ripping into it, when the last few days he's looked like he's been absolutely cooked, and then turned it around today.
No one wanted him in there. No one wanted him in that break. And he really had to earn his spot in that breakaway. And yeah, kudos to him. And I had noted down that he is single-handedly pulling something out of this Tour de France for Total Energies. So yeah, again, well done to them. On Dylan Groenewegen, no one is expecting him to go and pull things back. But given the Tour de France that he's had, the fact that he's decided to go on a Pacific cruise during this Tour de France instead of winning sprint stages, it would have been nice. Like, I don't think he would have done any damage to his reputation if he had jumped on the front. But yeah, I was surprised to not see Luke Durbridge on the front.
I think the problem, and the reason he wasn't and the other riders weren't, is they just weren't in the peloton anymore from pretty early on in the race because it was such a hard start. We saw the peloton split to bits. We haven't seen all the riders coming yet, and it'll be interesting what the time limit is for today because it's not a mountain stage, so the percentage tends to be a little bit lower. And there was a lot of riders dropped on that very first climb of the day. Arnaud Delis having another absolute shocker. I think he managed to make it back to the main group header. But I think this almost speaks more of Kaden Groves to be winning solo as a sprinter on a day where most of the sprinters are getting dropped on the first climb. And yeah, like for me, as someone that has ridden against him quite a bit, even in Australia before he was pro at the level that he is now, he's frustrating in that he is such a good sprinter, one of the fastest guys in the world, yet also just crazy strong and can get over these hills well. So he's just one of those guys that really can do it all. And I hope that he gets more opportunities in this team after something like this. Anyone that's within the sport knows how strong he is and has seen it many times before, but now on the biggest stage to do this and be given his opportunity, I think it's really good for him.
Is this the start of Kaden Groves, the classics leader?
He's on the worst possible team for it because he's still got two guys ahead of him. Kaden can be a lot better in the Ardennes than Jasper Philipsen can. He can't be better in the Ardennes still than Mathieu van der Poel can. But yeah, he's in the worst team for it, and he has recently signed an extension with this team. And my fiance just asked me as we were watching the finish, why is he staying on this team if he is so good himself? Would he not just go somewhere else where he can do every bunch sprint he wants and race every classic he wants? And the thing is, we've seen with strong sprint teams in the past and strong sprinters on these teams, when they go to other teams, the success doesn't continue and come as easily when you don't have that lead out, when you don't have that support. Now, Caden's doesn't really fit the mold of the standard sprinter, so I believe that he could still be successful on other teams, but he's going to get dropped off in so many better places so much more often with the Alpecin de Koning team. And there's a lot of instances where playing second fiddle still gives you even more opportunities than being the number one rider on a much smaller team that doesn't have the same support.
And it's not like he's getting it's not like he's not getting opportunities. He was their sprinter at the Giro d'Italia. It's, they are, because they've got two people that are so focused on the classics, they're going to rest those guys, which means Kaden is probably going to be the main sprinter at every Giro d'Italia that is there. So, it's not like he doesn't get the chances, and you often get a pretty decent lead out train for Alpecin at the Giro d'Italia because they're testing things out for the Tour de France. So it's not like they're going there with their B grade team either. So yeah, I don't know. I'd love to see him at a different team just because I'd love to see him be able to have his crack. It'd be great to see him go somewhere like Jayco and be hanging out with the Aussie boys and be going for sprint finishes. I think they're looking for a new sprinter. It seems like Dylan is on the move, but yeah, that's not going to happen. But
go on.
Yeah, sorry, go on. No.
I didn't have anything extra to add to it, but you go on.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I think it might, we are talking about the Aussies and we've talked about Ben O'Connor. I am just going to get my dickhead of the day out of the way and say it goes to the Jayco team for not being able to control that. But I guess, like you said, I didn't wake up until 11 o'clock. These stages have been going a bit longer than I expected them to go today, and it was only 50 Ks to go. So I missed that first climb, just refamiliarizing myself with the profile. It is a pretty brutal start to stage 20 of the Tour de France. It's not the worst one that there's ever been. There have been some mountain stages on the last day, but yeah, it's not an easy one for sure.
Nah, and yeah, I think it wasn't so much tactical as just not having the legs, but at the same time, there's a lot of the riders in that team that haven't been. Yeah, well, it's been a hard week last week for everyone. So no, they're riders that would have been able to do those pulls probably hadn't had an easy day just to get around the last few days. And yeah, again, terrible weather. So it can be something as simple as not being in the right spot on a descent and just getting stuck too far back or even getting stuck behind a crash, because we did see a lot of crashes. I'm going to counteract that. We're sort of jumping around a bit, but my Domestique of the day is going to go to their one rider that did help, which is Mauro Schmidt. So speaking of crashes, he had an absolute shocker. So this one was doing the rounds on social media because he was doing the modern equivalent of the super tuck, which is the most aero position you can get, which is both hands on the tops and then still sitting on the seat as you have to now, but basically leaning your chest on the top. And I've never seen this happen, and the roads were crazy slippery because riders were sliding out everywhere. But just the fact you've got so much weight on the front wheel, he just didn't have enough weight on the back wheel going around not even a sharp corner, and just lost the back wheel in that there wasn't enough traction. So he hit the deck at 70 or 80 Ks an hour there, and I thought that's his tour done for sure. And then 10 Ks later, he was back and pulling on the front of the peloton. So to have the physical strength to recover from a crash like that, but then the mental strength to not just throw the towel in at that point when it is pissing with rain, all your other teammates have checked out for the day in the group pedo, and then to bring himself back and sit on the front for the next 80K for his teammate to try and hold on to 10th was pretty admirable from Mauro Schmidt there. So he gets my Domestique of the day.
And it is an easy one to, I guess, shit on Jayco and say, oh, they should have made the break. But often you've got multiple teams that might have missed that are agitating for it. You've got the GC battle that also helps you bring it back because they want to cap the breakaway at a certain distance. But the biggest threat to GC was Jagat. He is so far down that he doesn't threaten the top positions. He, in fact, has no chance of even threatening 8th place. And so there were just no other teams that were willing to actually put in a shift and try and control it. And so it fell entirely to Jayco. And yeah, unfortunately, with the way that Jayco was at that point, it fell entirely to Mauro Schmidt. Now, O'Connor might be sitting there and thinking, well, I kind of have the shits now. I wish we had come with a team that is more suited to this instead of trying to split our ambitions. And hindsight being 2020, with Groenewegen not walking away with anything here, it probably would have been better to come with a climbing dominated team that was better able to support someone like Ben O'Connor. And I think that will be something that they will be having a look at the end of this. But yeah,
well, you have to remember that you would hope that Eddie Dunbar would have been on the front ripping there as well. And he did crash out in the first week. And you probably, there's a good chance that there are other climbers in that team that would usually be able to pull there are probably sick or carrying some kind of niggle from a crash because, you'd expect Luke Durbridge. He showed it earlier in the tour that he was capable of doing that. Plappy just finished 5th in an uphill TT. He's definitely not getting dropped on that first climb. There's more of a chance that he was dropped on one of the descents just from the position that he was riding when he was on the coverage at least. But it's Benno would be very pissed off at the team. But then also the team would have told him, look, if it comes down to it, you have to follow Jagat. Really hard to identify everyone in those conditions, but all he had to do basically was stick to him like glue, and he'll eventually just be annoyed at himself for not doing that, I think.
One funny thing did come up. We've often talked about Lenny Martinez and how he is really not the kind of guy to go on flats and plateaus. There was one point where the camera cut to a group that was trying to join the breakaway, and I had to laugh because the big diesel engine, the big locomotive on the front pulling that group across was Lenny Martinez, and I think your chances are doomed when you're relying on Lenny Martinez. He's like a little Italian greyhound, and you're relying on him to try and close that. That just, I think I actually laughed out loud from memory just seeing him trying to close those gaps. So.
Yeah, and there was a lot of desperation from even the Chase group of riders trying to come across with Wout van Aert, and Tom Scoinch was another one that was in there. But a lot of riders just trying to make something of their last opportunity in the tour. They might get an opportunity tomorrow as well. We'll see how the stage pans out, but a lot of desperation for riders to get involved, and we saw some strange tactics because of that in terms of the race looking like it was over and riders still going for things. I'm going to throw in my dickhead of the day and say the strange tactics of guys contesting the bunch sprint for, look at what the place was. So it was for 13
rider.
Yeah, it was for 13th place. So 15 UCI points up for grabs, which Astana took the 13th and 14th. So they got 25 UCI points out of that, which for them, well, they've got enough now that they're safe. And I can see why, for example, the Arkea riders also, it's their chance of being the top 15 in a Tour de France stage. I would definitely be very happy. That would be the best result in my career personally, to do something as good as that. But at the same time, if you're going to do that, don't crash in the front of the peloton when you are sprinting for 13th place, 7 minutes behind the leaders. So I don't have the names exactly because I didn't want to falsely identify anyone and throw them under the bus. But yeah, not a great look to crash when you are sprinting for 13th place, 7 minutes behind.
There was quite a funny camera pan after that SBS coverage, which I'm pretty sure all coverage is the same. It's all provided by the French television. So they cut to a slow-mo of Wout van Aert turning over his shoulder and doing a welfare check on Tadej Pogacar to make sure that he'd made it through fine. And Tadej was just laughing and shaking his head. I think he's a bit done with some of this. And it did look like a few of the GC guys were pretty shitty with that. The funny thing, I think, for Cofidis, Netflix pulling out of the Tour de France Unchained has never come at a better time, because they would have an episode just on the catastrophe of their Tour de France. That it wasn't Cofidis' fault there. The Arkea guy basically just completely wiped out his rear wheel. But
well, if you remember back, Cofidis had all their bikes stolen just before the tour started. I bet they are wishing.
Twice.
Yeah, the women's team
twice.
as well as the men's team. But I bet they're wishing now that the police didn't recover them, because it would have saved them. Yeah, would have saved them all of this.
Home.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, but yeah, not too much in regards to. I mean, nothing really has changed in regards to overall classifications. Milan is still in green. Poggy is still in yellow. The only change there is the swap between 10th and 11th. And the KOM points. Tadej Pogacar has now locked up the KOM jersey. So that, I think, is his third KOM jersey at the Tour de France, on 117 points, in front of Vingegaard on 104 and Lenny Martinez on 97.
Yep. One other thing I noticed from today, before we get to some other business, was the Quinn Simmons interview, which a lot of other riders and even staff, actually, the team manager of the rider in question might have cost him a stage win. So Quinn Simmons, the interview we're referring to, is him complaining about the motorbikes towing away breakaways. I was paying really close attention from the moment Harry went away, and at no point did I see him getting any real assistance. The shots from in front of him were always quite far away, and the roads allowed this more than they have perhaps in other stages. And then also, yeah, from most of the time, the motorbikes were behind or to the side of him. And then this was the same when Kaden Groves was away. Jonathan Vaughters came out last night and said he supported Quinn Simmons as well. And I would assume that those two do not see eye to eye on many things at all. But he supported his sentiment in that the motorbikes influenced the race way too much. I've been paying pretty close attention to it because, yeah, as a rider, it is frustrating. And I mentioned this the other day, how often they influence the race. But it does look like they've made an effort and had a briefing with all the moto riders to make sure that it is not changing as much. And part of it could be because it's wet and they're trying to keep the spray off their face or whatever it is. But it cost Harry Sweeney a stage win today, in that there was a moment there where he was close to the 1 minute mark. And if he's just getting a sit behind the motorbike and gaining 5 seconds every few Ks, and that blows out to 110 or 120, the group behind stops cooperating and he's gone, the same way that Ben Healy was gone, the same way that Tim Wellens was gone. So as much as I would have loved to see Harry win that stage, because he's a good mate and former teammate of mine, I think it is good that he wasn't getting any unfair assistance from the motorbike, as we've seen in other stages this tour.
I think Harry Sweeney might be joining about 50% of America in thinking that Quinn Simmons is a bit of a dog of a bloke after that, though. So, yeah, a bit of a shame for Harry. But I did notice the same thing. There was a point where it looked like the motorbike was about 500 meters away. So, yeah, they were really in the distance. But yes, again, it's not too technical today. But I don't know if you saw, but on the other end of the peloton, a motorbike almost rode over a rider today. I can't remember what the team was, but
It was, I think, Israel, or could have. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was Israel. Might have been Groupama. They look so similar that they're very hard to tell apart. But yeah, that one I also saw, and I just thought, yeah, motorbikes probably don't need to be following that closely, because as a rider, I couldn't think of much worse if you are already crashing on a descent than getting run over by a motorbike, other than being run over by a team car. But yeah, let's just try and keep the vehicles a bit further away. I think is a pretty simple fix for that. And then, yeah, the other thing that it was on social media yesterday, which is worth highlighting, is how bloody good these TV motorbike cams are. In that there was footage of one of the motorbike cameras going down a descent, and you take for granted because you're just watching what you're looking at, and you're watching these descenders, and we're calling out some of these descenders for not being fast enough. Yet these motorbikes are just the cameraman is standing on the back of this motorbike holding a heavy camera, not holding onto his pilot at all, and just completely trusting him on these descents to provide us this footage. So as much as it could have got hairy there, we also probably need to give a shout out to the footage they have provided us throughout the tour.
100%. Being on the other side of it at the tour of Magnificent Shanghai and seeing, I was part of the media team there, and I was spending every night with the photographer who was on the back of the bike. And yeah, you don't really appreciate until you're going down some of these descents that these guys are going 100 k's an hour down some of these descents, taking photos, facing backwards. They're not, I mean, you don't want to be strapped to a motorbike, but they don't really have a lot of safety. These we talk about riders and speed humps and things like that. The same thing applies to them. They're taking the same risks, and I think it's mental. I was talking to one of the guys that was in the commissaire car, and he said that another thing that you don't really appreciate, they have to keep up with the race, and these bikes are descending at 100 k's an hour down some of these, and it is easier to take these corners on a two-wheel bike than it is in a four-wheel car. He said he was shitting himself going around some of those switchbacks at ridiculous speeds. Said his driver should apply for the F1 because it was mental. So yeah, I think often they are. It's there's a few jobs like this where you never really get thanked, but you often cop a lot of heat. And I think the TV guys that bring us amazing footage, that's one of those jobs. No one's ever going up and saying, "Oh, cheers for making a really good show," but they are the first ones that get shat on when something goes wrong.
Yep. Now, good to give them a shout out. Is there anything else you want to touch on from today before we move on?
Nah. So my domestique of the day is the same one. I didn't really have a Lazarus of today. It doesn't help that I only really watched the last 50 kilometers. But yeah, I think I'm pretty good to move on.
Yep. So we're going to get on to the reel that blew up the most. Is that what's next on the agenda?
Yeah, let's do it. So we spoke about Poggy and doping and how we're a little bit frustrated with the discourse that comes around this every Tour de France. And our take was essentially, in the face of zero evidence, we think it would be really beneficial if we didn't have to have this conversation every Tour de France solely based on performances. Now, we've been getting a little bit of pressure from Domestique to put out some social media stuff. So I clipped that. I thought that would be a pretty good reel, would get some attention. And attention it was very much unexpected. I'd put out, I think, 2 or 3 reels before that from this podcast. They were maybe 300 likes. And this reel, just scrolling through, is currently sitting at 223,000 views, 775 shares, 7,000 likes. So my wife,
I like how the attempt was to put something to bed, and you just ripped the top off a can of worms, and they have just been going everywhere ever since.
Look, the funny thing is, they've exactly proved my point. The amount of comments in here that are just 100% unfounded speculation is ridiculous. It's like they're almost not paying attention to what they're commenting on because they are literally just reinforcing the point that I'm trying to make in the reel. And before we go any further with this, the point that I'm trying to make is not that there is not room for skepticism. I am someone who came to cycling. I think my first Tour de France that I watched properly was Lance Armstrong's last Tour de France. I remember exactly where I was when the Oprah Winfrey interview came out, and that really had an impact on me. And I do genuinely find it hard to trust cycling. But I am someone who believes that if you are going to make accusations against someone, accusations that in a lot of cases border on defamation, I think you at least owe it to the sport to actually have some evidence before you come out and make claims that, in light of a complete lack of evidence, are 100% unfounded and you're just going on gut. Do you?
Yeah, that for me, it's the same thing. Like that for me, the skepticism is completely rational in that the history of the sport is terrible, up there with the worst sports in terms of the amount of doping. If you look at past Tour de France winners, if you look at the history back to the very beginning of the sport, the big problem is that we know doping works really well in cycling. And that is probably what sets it apart from a lot of other sports. You don't get doping problems like this in Australia's biggest sport, AFL football. You don't get doping problems in baseball to the same extent. Of course, there is widespread cheating, not widespread cheating in these, but there is cheating that goes on in these. There is supplements issues. We've seen it in AFL before. We've seen it in baseball before, but to the level that we see in cycling, not at all, because in cycling, it makes such a big difference. For this, we have more testing than any other sport. We have a lot more ways of measuring performances than any other sport that allow us to try and hopefully detect this. Now, one thing that I don't think I made clear in the past episode, and if you only saw the reel, go back and look at that discussion because I don't want to repeat too many points because it is pointless. You can just go back and listen to that full discussion first. One thing I didn't make clear is there is still doping in cycling for sure. I've raced against dopers this year who have been caught and suspended this year. Tour of Hainan, a point pro, so second tier race in China earlier this year. The fifth place on GC, Carlos Chia, was suspended for doping using a banned weight loss drug. And that was, for me, very convenient in that I moved up to sixth place on GC, but also ultimately very sad because I thought, how many of my other competitors are doping as well? And not just this, but we've seen in Australia, Jesse Ewitt, a continental level rider, he was banned for using EPO beginning of last year. Now, again, not a high profile name, so you probably haven't even heard of the story. But in the Tour de France, Robert Stannard racing this year served an anti-doping rule violation for blood passport discrepancies, where, for those that don't know, blood passport in sport, in cycling and in all sports, is a method used to determine whether the values in someone's blood, and the things that are mostly measured and accounted for here is hemoglobin concentration and red blood cells, because these have been shown to have huge benefits in cycling performance, also very influenced by EPO and similar drugs, blood doping as well, because blood doping there isn't actually a test for. So if you put a blood bag in, the idea is that from the WADA point of view, they've got my sample when I get tested here. They've got my sample from February when I got tested in my apartment. They come back sometime in April. I don't know when they're going to come, and they test me again. If I've just grabbed a blood bag from the fridge and put it in the day before, as they used to say back in the day, I'm glowing. Like, they can see that I have, either used EPO to boost that blood or chucked a blood bag in, whatever it is. So this is the way that we're largely getting around this. So we had an instance where Rob Stannard had a discrepancy. He's contested that and said that it was natural. And that's not my place or anyone that doesn't know him or the exact circumstances to decide whether that was natural changes in blood hematocrit and red blood cell count or whether it was from doping. But that's a little background. I don't by any means say that there's no doping in the sport. I'm confident that it's not as widespread as a lot of people are getting at. What we're referring to is just the accusations that Pogacar is doping and that no one else is. And I guess the rationale behind these accusations. And you, I think, have got some points that you want to get to on why in this specific case it's a little bit unfounded that people are pointing the finger at him.
Yeah, so look, it was... I received a message this evening. I was going to try and get an early night, and I received an Instagram message from someone saying, don't let the couch commentators get to you. And I thought, well, I'm a couch commentator, so I'm not letting anything get to you. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, oh, well, you are on the Nero show. And he expressed it as a bit of a takedown. Now, I've watched the clip from the Nero show. If you want to know what we're referring to, the Nero Show podcast is a very successful Australian podcast. Jesse and Chris do a pretty good job there. And honestly, if anything, I'm a little bit flattered that we have been mentioned on a podcast of that level. So I want this to come across first as I am not trying to start any beef. I appreciate them addressing it. I think the way that they addressed it was more measured than other people have addressed it. However, because they have essentially pulled up my reel and then gone through and systematically unpicked it to say why they disagree with it, I think it's only fair that we have right of reply. So there were a few things that Jesse pulled out that he had issues with. Number one, Giannetti. So he's asked, have you Googled it? This isn't a hot take. And Jesse even admits that Giannetti being part of the UAE team is not evidence. It's not, and almost every team has someone with a legacy of doping. We saw in Ineos Sonnier get sent home. No one's accusing Arensman of doping on the 2 stages that he won. So let's just get that out of the way now. That's not evidence. Yes, I did say there's no smoke, and potentially you could say that's a whiff of smoke, but that's across the entire sport. So you're either accusing everyone there or you're accusing no one. Yes, he has a history. A lot of people have a history. We can get to things like Brunel, I think it was, that got told off. We can get to things like that about other dopers. The second one was the emerta, this idea that cyclists don't talk in the Lance Armstrong era. That's a crock of shit. They did talk. The whole reason that it came out was that cyclists were talking. But we also addressed this in the podcast. If there were whispers in the age of social media, they would come out. Are you telling me that some average cyclist wouldn't have sent a message when he was a bit frustrated about a loss? He's tried to delete the message. That's been screenshot and sent to the French newspapers. The French newspapers would be all over it like a rash if there was the slightest leak. And there would be. You can't take a shit without someone uploading a photo of it onto social media these days. Like, you would 100%. And if the Lance Armstrong era was happening in the era of smartphones, it would have come out even sooner. Like, I think that's just a completely invalid point. Third, Chris makes a point about the him being the anti-Lance. And I think they really latched onto this idea that I said, oh, well, people like Poggy, so he can't be doping. That's not the point, and you've missed the point there. The point is invalid. If it's so hard to believe, he's saying it's so hard to believe. I could never believe that Poggy's doping. But why is this out there then? So I don't agree with this idea that Pogacar is the anti-Lance and you're not allowed to touch him. There's almost like you can't speak out against him because he's too nice. People ask, like, Couch Peloton is speaking out against him. It's the actual Peloton that's not. And I think that... So anyway, they go onto the bikes. This is a tiny part of my point, and I was referring to nutrition, recovery, training, all of that. They refer to the bikes, and then they don't really make a point here, but I again want to re-emphasize this. I've read Tyler Hamilton's biography as part of the Discovery team. And Floyd Landis used to go out skateboarding after stages. Now, that just wouldn't happen these days because that's not suitable for recovery. The nutrition was essentially be anorexic. That was the nutrition. Be as light as you possibly can. Don't eat stuff that's going to make you put on weight. And again, that's completely changed. And training for these guys was essentially go out on a bunch ride. And now we have individualized coaching. Like it's fundamentally shifted there. He then brought up Nick Owen and was essentially just putting words in Nick Owen's mouth. And I think he completely just took, I mean, death of the author kind of thing. But what Nick Owen was essentially saying was his numbers aren't that different to Plapp. And then they end up going on to say that Plapp and Healy, they don't believe are doping, but Pogačar, they suggest is doping. But Nick says that Plapp's numbers are not that dissimilar to Poggy's, and Plapp is nowhere near being the best rider in the world at the moment. So if you can believe that Luke Plapp isn't doping, and Luke Plapp is, I don't know what he's rated in the world, but he is certainly not anywhere near the top 10. No offense, Luke Plapp. Like that's not saying that you're a bad cyclist. How can you then say that Poggy is doping if the numbers aren't that? And then the last thing that I wanted to bring up, Jesse refers to a graph. It's the Lanterne Rouge graph. They plot all of these outstanding watts per kilo efforts. And he says all the people on here, except for Vingegaard and Pogačar, are dopers. Well, no shit. Because what's your sample size there? Like, how many efforts do you have of the era where everyone was doping versus the period where people are not doping? There's maybe 10 years. And my point to this would be cycling, once doping was taken out, like you said, doping is so beneficial to cycling, and so much of the peloton was doping, that once that's taken out, it must have been this period where everyone's trying to learn how to train again now that you can't just take drugs. And so there's going to be a point. And if you watched cycling in the 2010s, it was fucking boring because no one was on drugs anymore. And everyone was just shit. And like, I would compare it to the speed suit era in swimming, where you were getting all of these records being knocked off because everyone was using speed suits, and then everyone stopped using speed suits and things slowed down, and now records are getting knocked off again. That's not a sign that they're doping. That's just a sign that swimming has caught up again. The last thing that I want to touch on is Jesse or Chris said they believe that it's on the cyclist to prove that they are not doping. And this is nonsense. So, number one, a lot of the cyclists do release heaps of their numbers, and they are very transparent. There is a rigorous anti-doping system in place. You've just talked to that, Cyrus. Things like the biological passport. Pogačar's always been on that, and there's never been an anomaly. So it's not like he's been able to even set up a base of doping. But my comparison here, and it's only because it's in the zeitgeist, I'm not trying to make a political statement here, but I'm going to go with the Epstein files and Donald Trump. Everyone believes that Donald Trump's in the Epstein files now. No matter how much evidence Donald Trump releases now, you either believe he's in the Epstein files and he's now covering things up, or he's not in the Epstein files. So that's the same with Poggy. At what point is releasing enough evidence okay? He's either, to carry the thing, he's either in the Epstein files and he's covering up the evidence. I just won't release the Strava data that proves I'm doping. I'll only release the Strava files where I have a shit day or something like that. Or alternatively, he's not in the Epstein files, but confirmation bias is either going to kill him or not here. It's not, there's no amount of evidence that he can release here. And that's why the burden of proof is never on the person being accused of something. The burden of proof is always on the accusers. And to bookend this, because it has been a bit of a rant, but there's no evidence again.
Yeah, that was the first question I had, and I saw a lot of comments, and was basically always just saying, okay, like, give us some evidence in this case. And then, yeah, just every time speculation, either from a lot of it based in the watts per kilo debate, and then a lot of it pure just emotion of I've been burnt by cyclists before, so I can't believe any cyclists again. And I get that because, yeah, despite a lot of people in the comments, I'm not old by any means, but I was certainly watching during the Lance era, and I grew up thinking that he was the coolest thing ever and that he was the best ever. And he was the first reason I went over to watch the Tour Down Under in 2007 because he was there racing with Radio Shack, and I thought he is the coolest thing since sliced bread. And turns out he was not. He was just a cheat, and so were all of the rest of them. And he got a big ban because he was an asshole about being a cheat. But that hasn't made me just assume that everyone that is much better than anyone else is a cheat for the rest of my own career and enjoyment of watching the sport. Because personally, if I'm lining up on the start line against guys and assuming that they're cheating, I may as well not show up because I already think, okay, this guy's got an advantage on me. I'm just not going to be able to beat them. And then also it just completely takes away from my enjoyment in watching if I think it's not a level playing field. So if there's evidence that does come to light, completely happy to change my opinion and say I was wrong. And I can't say for sure whether he's doping or not. But to avoid going in circles too much, I've just mapped out some things that I think the sport can do to try and not ease, I guess, just stop some of the questioning that is unfounded and just give people a little more confidence that there isn't so much doping within the sport as there used to be. So first thing, and this is what got raised a lot, is the dopers working for teams. So Mauro Giannetti, quoted all the time, even Machin has had links to doping in the past, and these are the two big dogs at UAE. But for me, I don't agree that this means that Pogacar is doping by any stretch. But for me, I agree that just remove dopers from the sport. But this isn't just going to be UAE. This is going to be Grisha Newman from Visma Lease Bike, who's been associated with doping in the past. This is going to be Jonathan Vaughters, who was riding on the team with Lance Armstrong and under Johan Brunel as a DS. He is now running the EF team. I'm not clear of this whatsoever because my team for the last 2 years had multiple former dopers as director sportifs. And from a rider experience, it sucks being on a team with them, even though these can be great guys. Like, they're not terrible guys. And while it's very hard to excuse them in this instance because they're cheating, it's really the reason it sucks to be on a team with them is because they just assume that we should be able to train the same way that they did when they were doping, in that we can just back up hard days over and over and over again. Also, that we should be able to go to Tomorrowland in the summer like they used to do and spend all of November and December drinking like they used to do, and then still be flying for their main races because they had a little extra help. So for me, I'd be quite happy to see all dopers removed from the sport. Also, actually, right now, the guy that runs my Chinese team is a former Discovery rider. He was riding on the team with Lance Hincapie, Brunel. So yeah, it is everywhere in the sport. Is it easy to fix? Not really, because as much as it might seem like myself and yourself, Aidan, are talking to as experts, we don't have 20 years of riding experience in a pro peloton to give to riders. So we can't take over a pro team. If you look at all of the riders from the last 20 years that then move into these staff roles to pass on knowledge that they have around racing, around training, around all of these things, they were implicated in doping because not everyone, but the vast majority were doing it. So it's a really hard clean out, but I still think that should happen. And then the other simple one for me is make the race numbers public and make that compulsory. So all the riders, I'm not saying force riders to use a power meter, and it would be cool in this instance because Mark Madio might get his way and riders might stop using power meters if they're forced to make the numbers public. But they already can provide this data with the little thing that they clip onto the saddle rails that can connect to the power meter. We've seen it on the TV in the Giro a lot more than in the Tour. But force those to be public, because this would remove the crazy watts per kilo estimations that Nick Owen talked about in our initial reel. They're just not accurate. And the reason that they keep getting pushed and keep blowing up on social media is because when you get these guys say this, look at this thermonuclear climbing effort, best ever seen, that blows up because people want to see the best ever recorded thing. They want to talk about whether someone could possibly be doing it naturally. It's not true. When you actually talk to the riders that were the ones putting out the numbers and you ask them what their numbers were during that effort, it's just like well off the mark. And by not 1 or 2%, but often between 5 and 8% I've seen for riders' estimations when they actually release the data. So that is another one that I think would be really simple to remove some of the doubt. Do you think this would make a big difference, or is it only going to convince the people that are already not as skeptical?
I think one of the reasons why cyclists don't release their data is because there is a level of secrecy to cycling. You don't want to give information to your competition, etc., etc. I think another reason that they don't is what I said before, where evidence and transparency is often only used against you. And yeah, I'm not sure whether it would I think from a viewing perspective, to be able to see someone's watts live would be awesome. I don't care how fast they're going. I'd love to know how many watts they're pushing out. That would be a sick little graphic in the bottom there. If I could see, you know, Tadej Pogacar and Jonas Vingegaard, their comparison of their watts in the bottom of the screen, that would add a level of viewing. Oh, I can't imagine how good it would be, but I don't think it would put this to bed. I don't know. I think your first point, cleaning out cycling, 100%. I think it's an absolute joke that Giannetti can be the director sportive of a team. I do. But where does that end? And
well, the thing that makes it really hard, so this isn't an easy fix of just go, right, let's go through and scrap all the dopers, because a lot never admitted to it and were never sanctioned for it. And it's tricky because how much do you give a lifetime ban for someone that once used a trace element of a masking agent and contested it and got off? Should they still be allowed to be in it and others not? And yeah, then you just end up only punishing the ones that were honest about what they did back in the day, and then the ones that weren't get through. So it is a really tricky thing to do. And the Nero show mentioned that eventually they will naturally clear out, but it's a tricky thing to do. But yeah, that's the issue. I think it just sucks that the sport is still run by people that were doing this back in the day.
And I think I'd like to close this by again saying, I'm in no way upset with the Nero guys for bringing this up. It's awesome publicity for our podcast to start, but also, like, I think their discussion was, while I did have a bit of a rant about it, I do think it was pretty nuanced. I don't have an issue with guys like the Nero show, because at the end of the day, they came to the conclusion that neither of them want to come out and say that Tadej Pogacar is doping, because, again, there's no evidence that he is. It's just the numbers. So I don't have an issue with them doing it. My issue, and I think we made this clear in the podcast, was our issue is from just the rampant speculation that comes out literally for clicks. As Caitlin has said in the comments here, this is why people put these stories out in the Tour de France. It is such a hard media environment to break through, and it's no coincidence that the only reel that we've put out trying to break through into this media environment that has gone viral is about doping.
Well, and we dipped our toe in the water of US politics, which was possibly putting our foot in it instead.
I deleted that one. That was too much heat that I didn't have the expertise to handle. So yeah, I ended up I sat that one out, went to the bench. But with that, yeah, again, thanks to the guys from the Nero show. I do think one of the awesome things about this, it was a weird thing for me. I don't know how it was for you, Cyrus, but to have something that you've said be challenged, I think maybe I have come across a little bit like worked up about it. I think more I'm just like excited about the fact that something I've put out into the ether is actually being picked up and challenged by people that I genuinely respect. So yeah, thank you, guys. I appreciate you seeing our stuff and think it was worth having a chat about. With that, one more stage. Hey.
Yeah. So the other topic, which is we don't have much time left for is should stage 21 be the traditional boring champagne sipping sprint finish, or should we have a stage like we have tomorrow? Now, I don't know whether my take will create any viral reels, but Aiden, do you have a take on this? What do you think? Should it be the traditional procession, or are you happy we've got a stage like tomorrow?
I like the procession. I like the riders having an opportunity to ride through the streets coming into Paris, sipping champagne. I think it can be taken too far. And the Giro, where they decided to stop off at the Vatican and get blessed by the Pope, was an example of probably taking it a bit too far. But I think the Tour de France has always made this stage a bit of a procession. And man, it would just suck if Poggy crashed out tomorrow. And I really hope that I don't put the mocker on in there. But you've been through the hard ones. I can understand why the riders have the shits about this. The sprinters, I can understand, because this has always essentially just been a crit race. It's been like you come in, you do the thing, and then we have a crit race, and it's for the sprinters, and it's one for them. So yeah, I think go back to the procession. Personally,
right? You're probably going to be one of the only fans that's saying that. From what I've heard, the riders definitely don't seem as popular. For me, right now, I'm on the fence, so I'm probably a little bit more towards liking it than you. I'm going to decide after tomorrow based on whether the race is actually more exciting or not. Because at the end of the day, it's the riders that make the race. There has been some finals on the Champs-Elysees. Now they haven't been contested from far out, but there has been some exciting finals where the breakaway has looked like they're a chance of getting there. They haven't for a very, very long time, but yeah, hasn't always been super bland. The thing for me as a rider, I can see why a lot are hating it, because a lot of guys just want it to be done. They don't want another hard day. I'd love to say that I'd be there on the start line, super excited, because the breakaway has more of a chance and it will be more attacking racing. But the reality is I would probably be like the vast majority of the peloton that is absolutely cooked, or the reality is I would be well and truly out of the race by now after having missed time cut. But anyway, the riders there, there's going to be a few that are really happy because they get to have a crack. And there's a lot of teams that have completely missed out for this Tour de France so far that don't have a sprinter that will be very happy that there is going to be some kind of race taking place. But yeah, there's going to be far more higher percentage of the peloton that just want it to be over and don't want the risk of crashing. And as we saw today, the risk of crashing is largely just decided by the riders. In terms of the crash on the wet descent was just two guys going into a wet corner too fast, and then the crash in the finish line was guys boxing on for a sprint finish when they probably didn't need to. So I think we will see UAE probably just go to the front and ride a very solid tempo with Pogačar in third wheel to try and mitigate any risk of crashing. And yeah, it's going to be tough to see a breakaway being able to stay away when there is still the incentive there for sprint teams to close things down.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a 132.3 kilometer stage. It's not huge. It's pretty flat. There are actually quite a few Cat 4, 5 Cat 4 climbs, but for me, they'd be mountains. For these guys, they're just pimples. And yeah, it goes from Mans-la-Ville to Champs-Elysees. It's yeah, I don't know. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, I don't mind. I like the photos that the teams release of them all standing to get lined up, having a glass of champagne. I think it's good for the riders to be able to have a nice casual ride as a bunch and everyone just have a chat without there being the heat, and then mix it up at the end. But really, I'm just putting a take in here because it's something that we have a podcast. I need to have an opinion on it. At the end of the day, if they change it forever, I don't actually give that much of a shit.
Yeah. Well, I just hope that everyone gets through cleanly don't see, as you said, any changes in the GC because of that. The thing that I would absolutely love to see is Pogacar go for the win in yellow on the Champs-Élysées, which I don't think has ever been done. And he is possibly the only rider that has any chance of doing that. And it is a stage where he could actually do that. Whether he takes that risk is another story, but that would really off the tour for me in what has been probably quite a bland final week. That would be a good way to cap it off, is with him actually just going out there and trying to win it like it's a one-day classic.
Totally. So this one has bloated a little bit. We do have some questions from viewers. So Ciara asks why Poggy is throwing away some easy stage opportunities here. I don't think that's the case, but it also blends into another question, which was, is Poggy actually feeling the race? I don't think he's throwing away stage win opportunities here. I think it's just been a hard Tour de France. Everyone's talking about how Poggy looks super fresh when he crosses the line. But then they say, why is he giving away stage wins? And I think he's tired, man.
He like the whole he looks fresh every time he finishes. It's just from people that clearly haven't watched the racing. If you look at the end of the spring classics, like Amstel Gold and Flesh Alone, he looked like he was ready to be put in a body bag. And then, if you look at the last few stages, he just looks absolutely cooked. So does the whole peloton. I was just looking at Harry Sweeney after today's ride on the finish. Looks like he's aged about 10 years. But the idea that these guys aren't cooked is insane. And one thing I haven't said, but if you just followed the race and all the media that have been on there, everyone's just cooked from just the travel, let alone doing all these stages. Like just doing, and you would have noticed it in Magnificent Ching, the race that you followed. Just the travel involved in these races. We're hearing the riders complain about the transfers. It's just a massive 3 weeks anyway. So for all the riders to get through, there's all of that stuff on top of the racing itself, and they're all just cooked. So if you're wondering why riders aren't pushing the whole way till the end in some stages, it's because they're cooked.
Totally. So the next one is what from Cotis. Why does Roglic get so much hate? I haven't seen any of this. I take the piss out of Roglic because it's a bit of fun. But
you take the piss out of everyone, in fairness.
Well, that's the idea. But I love Roglic.
He gets hate for his bike handling, which we were included in that yesterday because he looked terrible going down the descent, but he did put time into the peloton going down the descent. I think he possibly gets hate just because he crashes a lot and he doesn't look good on the bike, but he gets himself in very good positions in a lot of stages where he needs to be, and a lot of other riders crash quite a lot. So that's possibly what he's referring to. But I got stuck in a Instagram comment war at some point because I just in the Giro, no, not the Giro. Oh yeah, the Giro stage when it was the gravel stage, he was just in perfect position for all of the sectors when everyone in the peloton is also fighting for that position. So he gets hate for his bike handling, but he's not as bad as a lot of people make out.
Yeah. So the next one is from Artie. He's a local rider near me. I've actually raced with him a bit. He's really passionate about Australian grassroots. And he wants to know, now the tour is done, how do we grow grassroots in Australia?
Well,
I'm going to let you talk to that. I've got to go and chuck a dummy in a toddler's mouth.
Yeah. So the start of it is 2 Australian stage winners is massive in that you've got Kaden Groves winning and Ben O'Connor winning. I think just media coverage in Australia for these races is so important, not just on SBS covering the stages when everyone is asleep, but on mainstream media in the mornings, which we did see a bit of after the Ben O'Connor win. I hope we see more of after the Kaden Groves win. But the thing is just what we're doing here is just trying to grow the sport by talking about it, especially in Australia where we're both from, but around the world as well. But just talk to your mates about it. Have that not dinner table conversation, work morning tea conversation where you just chat to your mates and say, did you catch the tour stage? The same way that you would talk about other sports. And then they're more likely to go, oh, yeah, no, I did actually watch that one the other night, or I'll just go watch the highlights. And that's how you get people into the sport, I think.
Yeah. Now, in regards to getting people to attend things like crit races, that's a bit harder. I think it's always going to be tough to get people to attend racing just because people perceive it to be dangerous. And I think that comes down to clubs having a good bunch ride that then encourages people to come and do crit races. I've seen a lot of crits locally doing things like women ride free. And I think things like that are excellent. Just trying to bring down as many barriers as they can. And part of that comes from the top in regards to Oz cycling in Australia. And I think it's easy to have a crack at Oz cycling. I'd love to actually get on the inside of Oz cycling and actually have a chat to some of the guys there about what they're actually doing, because I think there is a lot of shade thrown at our national cycling organization, and I don't know really enough information about what they're doing to be able to comment one way or the other on there. But I think some clubs in Australia are doing really good work. He's Northwest Sydney Cycling Club, I think it is Arties, and they're doing some really good stuff. Park Life CC in Sydney is also doing some really good stuff in regards to their racing. And I've always got to give a shout out to Randwick Cycling Club in Sydney, that is always doing some really good stuff. I think the other clubs should have a look at what is successful and sort of try and emulate that as much as you can. Justin, is there? Oh, sorry, never mind. That one's just having a whinge about us having audible notifications on our phones, which I don't have. Mine's on silent. Juga asked, does having an opinion make you a target? It is one of the things that I've got a lot of imposter syndrome around doing this. I don't know how you feel, Cyrus, but I don't know. When they asked me to do this, I was in two minds about whether I was even qualified to do it. So, yeah, having an opinion and being a target is actually one of the things that I've been most anxious about. And it's hard to, you want to do these things with freedom. You want to say what comes to mind, but there is always in the back of my head, is this just going to get me laughed out of the room?
Yeah, I think for me as a rider, not many riders will have any hot takes because there is no win, especially like on the doping side. You can't win as a rider talking about doping because you're in my instance where you genuinely believe that the whole peloton is not doping after having not seen any evidence of doping as a pro rider. Yet everyone just assumes that you are either doping or just so naive that you somehow didn't notice that everyone around you was doping. Or
the people that came into my messages asking, how naive are you? I know, like,
and then even just on the other stuff, like having to call out tactics on race day, I have made many poor tactical moves. Having to call out poor racing in terms of not being good enough on race day. Every single rider in this Tour is more talented than me. I have not ridden the Tour de France, but I think that the idea that you have to be more qualified than the people that you are commentating on to comment on the people just doesn't leave that much room to talk about cycling then. And the whole idea of, for me, the whole idea behind doing this is not because either of us get a big paycheck at all. It is, for me, just growing the sport, having more people talking about the sport, creating those discussions around the sport, because this is the biggest race. If we can get more people talking about this, they're more likely to watch other races and they're more likely to get involved in the sport themselves. So the backlash that I cop from my end is going to be worth it if a few people get into the sport and because of what I'm doing here.
Yeah, and that point that you make about, when I was pitched this, I sort of came at it from the perspective of, well, I am your foil. So you're the guy on the inside, you know your stuff. I'm the guy that has only ever watched cycling from the couch. And I think both perspectives are important. So yeah, I think yes, it does make you a target. I have actually received way more positive feedback than I have negative feedback by like hundreds to one.
The best thing that I got from my own podcast, the Train Like a Monk one, was when I interviewed Matt Keenan, who is the commentator on SBS. He cops probably more backlash each stage than we would from this whole podcast because everyone in Australia and many other parts of the world on the world feed are listening to his commentary. But his big thing was that you just shouldn't take criticism from anyone that you wouldn't take advice from. And I thought that was a really good piece of advice. So for me, it's been really good to get feedback from people within the sport that have been listening to this podcast, pros that have been listening to this podcast that have said either, yeah, I agree with that, or no, you were wrong on this, because I'm happy to listen to them. For the people that just jump on with absolutely no idea and that aren't within the sport and don't know what they're talking about, for me, it's then pretty easy to brush off, because I just think, well, I'm not actually going to, there's no need for me to take on board this feedback because this person clearly doesn't have a clue what they're talking about.
And also, I'm happy to brush it off because I probably am wrong, and I'm, my takes in this are not the hills that I'm willing to die on. So yeah, it's been an interesting experience, but for me, it's been profoundly positive. So yeah. Danica asked, did I like being mentioned by Matt Keenan the other night? Yeah, it's pretty cool whenever your stuff cuts through. Apparently, one of my reels got mentioned on the German Tour de France coverage as well. So yeah, any cut through is nice, but at the same time, I've had a chat to Matt Keenan in the past. He's a really nice bloke. I guess I wasn't surprised you've had him on your podcast. I've been on the Pro Velo Super League podcast with him and Tills. So yeah, he's a top bloke. And it is a bit sad going from what you said, so much negativity about the SBS commentary. And as much as I'm like some things I don't necessarily disagree with, but at the same time, I would not do a better job. Hey,
yeah, and I think people are entitled to critique whatever they want, and yeah, I think the more you would notice in social media, you put yourself out there, you're going to get both sides. And for me, whenever I'm speaking to people about using social media, you have to be prepared to cop the shit stuff, but just focus your time on the good stuff instead, and then it makes it worthwhile, because you will cop a lot of shit stuff because there are a lot of shit people out there with opinions that don't align with yours. But yeah, I'm not saying you just ignore anyone that doesn't agree with you, but yeah, there's ways of going about it, like we discussed with the Nero guys, where they provided a pretty reasonable response, where that kind of stuff, I'm quite happy to not see eye to eye with people on everything, but just the respectful engagement is always good, and that's been one of the enjoyable things for me.
Totally. And the last one, Ryan Wayne Cycling is asking, is under 23 too late to get your first overseas racing experience as an Aussie in Europe, I'm assuming?
Definitely not. Like the idea that it's now there's like you're seeing all these stories about 15-year-olds being signed by world tour teams, and you might think that if you are finishing school, then you have no chance of being a professional cyclist from within Australia. I wouldn't agree with that whatsoever. I think just any racing that you can get in overseas is going to be good for you long term, regardless of whether you end up making it to the pro level. And it's just cool life experience to go and race your bike in a different part of the world, in a different country, see that culture, see that cycling culture. So don't get too caught up on the side of, will this make me be a pro? Is this going to be what I need to get onto this team by this time? Just go and enjoy it. And then if you are enjoying that process, there's a good chance it'll work out in the long run anyway.
Yeah, as someone that hasn't made a cycling career, but just someone like some professional advice at that age, just go and take your shots. At the end of the day, the opportunity cost of doing that is low. Like, just go and see what you can do with it. And if you can get over to Europe, go and race and have a good time. And it might go nowhere by the time you're 25. I didn't start teaching until I was 24. Like, your life is very young. Yeah, go and enjoy it.
Yep, agree.
With that, that's all the questions. Thank you, everyone. They are growing, which I think is a positive sign. And thank you to the people that have been in the chat. Thanks for the Domestique podcast. And if you were staying up or in Cyrus's area, if you were watching the women's,
it's already on TV.
Now, yeah, happy watching. I unfortunately am going to be going to bed, but I'll be watching it from tomorrow.
Beautiful stuff. Thanks for listening, guys.
See ya. Have a good night, everyone. Where's the stuff?